Hello, and welcome to the EUROPAST Podcast. This podcast is part of the international project EUROPAST, funded from the Horizon Europe Widera program. EUROPAST tackles contemporary issues in memory studies, memory politics, political discourse, and most importantly, public history, a field of study and practice that explores the ways in which the production of knowledge about history can be rendered more democratic, open, collaborative, and empowering, as well as the challenges associated with this process. In this podcast, members of the project team talk to public history practitioners, researchers, historians, activists, filmmakers, and many others about the developments, challenges, and implications of this fascinating approach of dealing with the past. If you would like to know more about the project, follow EUROPAST on Facebook and Twitter. We hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Welcome to the fourth edition of the EUROPAST podcast series. Today we have as our guest Dr. Emilia Koustova, a tenured university professor at the University of Strasbourg, France. Welcome, Emilia.
Hello.
I have had the privilege of knowing you as a colleague for several years, and I know that you have a fascinating transnational background as a historian and a scholar. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to this stage of your career, being a professor in Strasbourg?
Thank you for your question. So I started learning history and studying history and researching history in the 90s when I lived in Russia, in Moscow, and I was certainly influenced by all this atmosphere of the perestroika with the discovery of and the revision of the Soviet past, Stalinist past in particular. So I'm sure it was very important in my choice of the historical studies at the Moscow University. But at this point, I choose to study European history and medieval history of Italy and of France. And after these first studies, I came to France to continue with a MA degree, and then I did a PhD in Italy. So I moved.
You're truly transnational.
Yeah. But at that point, I left medieval studies and I started studying and researching Soviet history and the history of the Bolshevik Revolution. And at that point, I felt that it was important for me to have to feel me concerned by the history I'm studying, and that was maybe the main reason for changing the field and the period, etc. And so I did a PhD in Italy, but I continued living in France. And then after some years of other activities, researching, teaching, translating, I started working at Strasbourg University, and now, I have been working there since almost 15 years, and I'm very happy with this university, with the students we have, with the research we conduct there, and I think it is a very good point, Strasbourg. I mean, to have a look at both. Eastern Europe and West Europe, and also to have a connection with a very tragic and very complicated history of that European 20th century.
Thank you. As you know, our project is on public history, so we are kind of debating from various angles what public history is, what the practices are, and so on. And one of the main objectives that is always emphasized and connected to public history, is of course, to engage individuals, non-historians in the production of history, and oral history is one of the key tools in this process. You were involved in a major project to collect oral testimonies from individuals who were deported to the Gulag. And the goal of this project was to tell the story of the deportations, not, so to say, from above, but from the individual's perspective, by studying the life trajectories of deportees. And most of these deportees were children at the time. So could you please tell us about this project and its outcome and the challenges, of telling this history from below?
You are speaking about a collective project conducted by my colleagues Marta Craveri, Alain Blum, who are the two French historians, and also a journalist, Valérie Nivelon, a journalist from the French radio RFI. So, and there was also mainly about 15 other researchers participating to this collective project that started at 2008. And the project was about collecting interviews with former deportees from all Eastern and Central Europe. Mm-hmm. So Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Hungary, etc. All the people that had in common, that shared this mm-hmm. experience of Soviet deportation, Soviet repression during the Second World War and in the aftermath of Second World War. And I was involved in this project, and I think that it really changed my relationship to the history. It conducted me to start working on the history of the Soviet repressions in Lithuania, and it was also the first time I participated to an oral history project. Mm-hmm. And I think it was, really a discovery of another way doing history, listening to the individual voices, approaching the individual experience of history, and certainly, I don't think I became a oral historian. I continue now with mainly written sources kept in the state archives, etc. But this discovery of the people voices was really important. And to be back to this project, the idea was to listen to people, to have a recording for the history, because now we, unfortunately, almost all the people we met at 15 years ago, they are gone, because they were maybe 80 years old at this point, right. And now they are not here, and we are very sad about it, but we are also very happy that we had this possibility. Maybe it was almost they were the last years when it was possible, and now their voices are recorded. They can be listened because we also have a beautiful internet website with many materials. This site, audio materials, but also images from individual, private, and public archives. And it's this project and this site and books published thanks to this project conduct to really understand how pan-European is this history, and how the memory of this history is present especially in the Eastern Europe, but not only in the Eastern Europe, right. Because we also have some of these former deportees who then came to France or to Italy and so on. Yeah, and we also, then we continued with my colleague Alain Blum, we continued working on this subject, and we worked a lot in the Lithuanian archives, not only with the oral history, and now we are publishing a book about it. And in this book, we mix the two approaches, or many approaches, and we are looking from below and from the point of view, also from the point of view of the repressive institutions. So we see it from the different points of view, perspectives. And we also realize now how this approach conducts to restitute the agency to the people, to these deportees, because they are not only victims of the repression. Their life cannot be reduced to this situation of a victim. They are victims, but they also were daughters, sons, sisters, or maybe medicines, peasants, etc. So they have many other existences, and they also concert. Many of them concert this agency, and they tried to realize this agency. For example, when they tried to be back to their countries, when they sent letters to the repressive institutions, etc.
I just have two quick questions. One more related to the project. Who initiated the project? Were these historians or journalists? So what was the origin? It seems to be very, very timely. You guys were on time.
It came, as far as I know, it came from Alain Blum, who is a historian.
He's in Vilnius now, right?
Yeah. And so he's a specialist of Soviet history, and he was very, I think, impressed by the geography of the repression, and by these cities like Vorkuta, which in the 2000 were almost deserted, because they were cities created as part of the Gulag system, Gulag world. And so, as far as I know, but he could tell better this story. He spoke about his experience in Ural, in Siberia, to his colleague Marta Kraveri, who worked on the Gulag, on the camps of Gulag, and to this journalist from French radio. And so this project was conceived and started.
Wow, here we have this collaborative public history project. And also, one question, a little personal, if you don't mind. When you were growing up or going to school, did you know this history, and what was known to you?
When I started going to school, it was still the Soviet period, so we didn't speak about it. At least at school, it was completely impossible. But I have in my family, the subject was not erased, but it was no more very present. Maybe because in my closest family milieu, there was no evident absences. I mean, I had my two grandmothers and my grandfather, and from at this generation, everybody was there. But for example, I perfectly remember how I was 7 years old and we were in Moscow, and I went to my grandmother accompanied me to school as all the days, and we saw a car where there was a small portrait of Stalin inside. And it was in the beginning of the middle 80s, so before perestroika. And my grandmother, she looked to this portrait. Maybe I asked who it was because maybe I didn't know that it was Stalin. She told me that it is a person responsible for the death of millions of people. So, there were I think that it was true for many Soviet families that the people agreed to not to speak about some things to their children. But that I think that, for example, in my family, this question to who is Stalin, who was Stalin, my grandmother wasn't able, she didn't agree to make compromise on this point. And then I knew, and I think that I knew it some years after that, my grandmother saw her two husbands at different moments to go to Gulag. So, and then I knew all the tragic stories from my family. But I think it's quite typical of talking without talking, remembering without talking explicitly, etc.
Thank you. Well, Stalinism and the Gulag are not just the matters of history anymore. In light of the political repression in Russia today, the entire context, the war between Russia and Ukraine, how does this actually influence the practice of historians and museums? Not only in France, but elsewhere where you are working and, have a possibility to reflect.
I think that in the field of the studies, research about Eastern Europe, Russian history, Soviet history, the history of the countries which at some point of history were occupied by Russia or annexed by Russia, etc. So for these researchers, one thing is absolutely clear, is that we have to change our approach and our vision of this space, to decentralize it and maybe decolonize. But there is a debate about it,
right.
And I think we can't just the things have to be discussed, and we have to advance in this direction. But one thing is absolutely clear: we can't continue seeing this space as we did it maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or even 3 years ago. As for me, my vision changed. I think that everything every certain thing is re-questioned now, because of the war, because of this aggression coming from Russia, and because also of this complete negationism, Russian negationism of its own responsibilities, and so on.
Right. And in this context, then, it would be good to hear a few words about the fate of Memorial. Right? And the prospects for cooperation between Russian and European institutions on historical research into the Stalinist period, and other contexts. I would be grateful if you elaborate on that a little bit.
So if I begin with the end of your question, at this moment, it's impossible for us to have an official cooperation or collaboration with Russian public institutions, because they are institutions of a country which is conducting an aggressive war against Ukraine. But fortunately, there are in Russian-speaking space, or even sometimes in Russia, there are still some NGO like Memorial, and Memorial is the main actor in this field. So some private or civic actors which are trying to continue a honest research and a honest work on the memory, on the history, and it's really it is crucial to cooperate with the organizations like Memorial and to help them, because many of them now had to leave Russia and to come to Europe or to other countries, and they need to continue their work, and they need also, I think, to find new ways to address the Russian-speaking public, because the public in Russia, but also in other countries like maybe Baltic countries with their Russian-speaking population, etc. So it's very important, and but they continue their work, and it's dramatic that that all this work conducted by Memorial and others finally couldn't prevent what we are living now and what we are observing now. But maybe, it doesn't mean that this work is not useful. It's essential.
Do you have any contacts to people from Memorial? Anybody?
I'm a member of the French. We have in France. We created 3 years ago. We created 4 years ago. We created a French branch of Memorial, and I'm a member of this French organization, French NGO, and we have a website. We organize different academic or not academic events, and there was, for example, in December there was a public conference about the imperial dimension of the Soviet violence, and we also organize it. In this case, it's not French Memorial, but International Memorial and German Memorial, which are organizing a big conference in Berlin in April 2024 about the situation of the historian in front of the post-truth societies, and what historians have to do with this situation where when the differences between truth and fake are just more confused, etc.
Right. And who are the audiences? Is it more for professional historians, or also for history practitioners, or also decision makers? How does it work? Very briefly.
I think it's about all these kinds of public, and maybe we don't. Memorial doesn't necessarily has the possibility to directly address the decision makers, etc. But the voice of Memorial can be heard by, for example, by journalists, and I see it in France. That in France now many times the journalists contact French Memorial to have something, to have an opinion and information about what is happening in Russia, and so it is also a way to continue speaking, and it is also important for these thousands of Russian people who left Russia and who now, who needed who is concerned, and for whom I think it is important, this activity.
Right. So they do also, kind of public outreach of sorts as well. Well, we're in Lithuania now, right? How many times have you been to Lithuania?
I tried to count it, and I think that after 10 I stopped because
I
wasn't. No,
many number of years.
Many.
Right? The same with, let's say, Latvia, Estonia, Poland.
Only Lithuania.
Okay, so you spent many months then, really much time in special archives of Lithuania, studying Soviet repression and now local history. Right? You were looking at the documents on Pabradė, researching this small town. Tell a few words about the management of archives in Lithuania, comparing it with other post-Soviet countries, and not only, with other European countries as well. So if you could tell us about the archives and why they're interesting here and important, and in general, like what's changing in this changing context in terms of, let's say, your attitude towards the archives and the role of the archives.
I always had a very good experience in Lithuanian archives. It's clearly for me it is the best place to do research. Certainly, I think I have a chance because I work on this particular field, Soviet repressive politics in Baltic states. And for this topic, Lithuanian archives are very open and it is very easy to work here. And we have a very good contacts with people working in the archives, etc. And as far as I know, Lithuania is one of the countries, post-Soviet countries, which has the more open and more researcher-friendly politics in this relation. It is also, and since some years, it has been also the case of Ukraine, but obviously in this moment it is difficult for them to continue on these dynamics. But still, I think it is important to highlight it, that to stress it, that in Ukraine they continue opening the archives, and the archives, even in the cities which are affected by the bombs, etc., they continue working. And I think it is important from the point of view of the historical research, but it is also a very important symbol to show how the past is related to the present and how the openness of these archives of the Soviet time in the present, it is also a mean to fight against the repetition of the past, right. And again to fight against this Russian and Soviet and imperialistic view of the history, and fight against also the
distortions, perhaps, and propaganda,
to erase history, to distort history, to instrumentalize history, and it is very important. And I admire Ukrainian historians and people working in the archives.
Have you worked in the archives in Ukraine before?
I have never been in Ukraine to make a research, right. Just to participate to the conferences. But I worked with, and I'm working now with Ukrainian historians, and so by this means I also had an access to many archival materials.
Is there more collaboration now, cooperation among scholars, let's say in France, I don't know, University of Strasbourg, and Ukrainian scholars? Is there more?
Yeah, first of all, in France we have a program of welcoming Ukrainian researchers for 1 or 2 years, and we have in Strasbourg, in our department, we have one Ukrainian sociologist, right. But there are historians in other universities, so we have this kind of context.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know that coming back to Lithuania and Vilnius, I know that you are learning Lithuanian as well, right? So
Aš studijuoju.
Kalbate lietuviškai. Now, we're almost coming to an end of this short conversation. Very interesting. But I still have one more question to ask. And it's on a more lighthearted note. I suppose you saw the exchange actually in French television between a philosopher and the host of the show who could not agree which one of the 6 Baltic states were already in NATO and which were still struggling to get in. So leaving this funny exchange aside, I would like to ask you a question. What can you say about the image of Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia, in the scholarly, and general population of France now? Do people know more? Are they becoming more aware, more understanding of who we are, where we are, or not yet? Not really.
No,
to be honest,
it's true that this conversation you mentioned was just an impossible moment to see them.
That's quite funny.
Yeah, just incredible. Yeah, but I think that that first thing that the Russian war against Ukraine changed some things and I think that at least the intellectual public in France is more conscious now about the heritages, like this traumatic heritage of history in the Eastern Europe. And I think
you mean
that
the former Soviet
But in Baltic countries, but also in Poland. And
right.
I think that now one thing is sure that again, the intellectual public, the people who read like serious journals, etc., they are conscious of the misuse of the history by Putin.
Right.
That is very important because
people are much more conscious about that. Right?
Okay. Yeah, that's true because the French media spoke a lot of this misuse, of this distortion, of this all this. They tried to explain what Putin means when he speaks about denazification, etc. So for this. There is, I think now, more consciousness than 2 years ago. But if we speak about the image of the, for example, Baltic states, it seems to me, but it's just an impression, that now they are seen like a normal European country. There is a difference between Ukraine or even, for example, these countries of Caucasus. But as for Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, they are like maybe there is a confusion between these countries
the
and Scandinavian countries.
Yes, right.
Balkanic countries, it's more surprising for me. But I think there is like a normalization, which is not a bad thing. It is like seeing Europe in all this diversity and
finally realizing that this is it's still Europe at this part of Europe. Emilia, it was very nice talking to you. Thank you very much for the conversation.
Thank you for your invitation.